Hey Chad, how's it going, man? First off, let me apologize for the glare in my glasses. I imagine it's gonna get worse. So I look at my notes. But anyway, I hope you're doing well. Thank you for letting me know that you're gonna be away in Toronto all week for work. And I think this ends up potentially being a useful thing. I'll talk more about that in a minute. First, I'm really glad that your back is feeling better. Uh, excuse me. We can get over this really quickly. Now, in terms of what what's happening or what could be contributing to these episodes, I think at least one of the things um, might be just some of the stress that your back incurs as I push you to squat deeper. Also coupled with, sorry, I think that part of this is likely the stress that your back is under as we have it do all these squats and deadlifts. We'll focus on the squat just because that seems to be the thing, at least over the last two instances, that has tweaked your back. Um, so the stress that your back is under, I think, due in part to some flexibility limitations. Um, but I'm also pushing you to squat deep. I'm also putting you under some pretty heavy loads and giving you more volume. Um, just greater training stresses overall, compounded, or I guess, yeah, compounded with not a super long history of training in this way, training at these intensities with this volume. The reason why I bring that up is because, at least as far as the research is concerned, looking at training loads and whether or not this seems to be related to injury risk, there's some thought right now, and it's still very much a developing field. Um, you know, we've got lots of arguments over particular claims made within the field, but it seems like um, we. Well, sorry, let me come at it this way. Some of the things we're finding in this field of research aren't new. So, for example, if as a coach I gave you double the amount of work that we did this week, next week, that's a big training spike, doubled your work. It's probably not a great move because that probably increases the risk that something not great is going to happen, right? I can't think of many instances where doubling someone's workload within the span of a week is a good idea, right? So we want to avoid big training spikes like that. But some of the other nuance that people are trying to figure out is, well, are there predictive things that we can look at to figure out who might be running a higher risk of injury versus who might be not doing that? I bring this whole thing up because the point that I want to make is, for you, if we scope out and look at the span of months and years prior to us working together, sure, you had been training, but I think it'd be arguable that you haven't been training with this intensity, namely the weight on the bar for these different lifts. And again, we'll talk about the squat or these volumes, and you probably haven't been pushed to squat as deep as as I've been pushing you to squat. So we don't have a very long history of or a period of time for your body to have gotten used to this. It's just really been since November since we picked up with each other. So that's one thing. Oh, sorry, yeah, that's one thing. And then um, I think that just you're not the most flexible person in the world, and that I'm sorry, I'm not explaining myself very well today. I'm going to come back to the flexibility point in a minute. Each and every one of us is going to have some degree of low back movement as we squat. You can have the most pristine looking squat in the world. There's still going to be some low back movement and quite a decent bit of low back flexion. We find that in the research too. There's that. Couple that in your case with, not a ton of flexibility. It could be argued that perhaps your back is under more stress than someone who's a little bit more flexibility in their hips, say, where the hips can move a little further before the back has to move as much as, or before the back has to do a bunch of moving. So we could go through the full range of motion. So trying to bring it all back, I think that we're working in some not phenomenal flexibility. That's one of the things that we have to take into consideration. We don't have a very long training history with these intensities and volumes. I think that's contributing to it. We also know in the research that having a previous injury is probably the strongest predictor of having future injuries or having future symptoms in that area. Now, I don't say that to then have you think, well, now I'm fucked just because I've hurt my back before and I'm always going to hurt my back. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what the research would indicate either. Rather, we can expect that sometimes we're going to have some pain, some symptoms that come up in the back. That doesn't mean there are always going to be episodes where you are running a large risk of not being able to walk. Not that at all. And that's not to say that we're not going to try to manage the risk of injury or the risk of tweaking things. We absolutely will. And we absolutely will be doing that. But to be transparent, the research does tell us that if we've had an injury or had, something hurt recurrently, that's probably an indication that we're at higher risk relative to someone who hasn't had that, of having that happen again in the future or having some sort of symptom in the area. Now, if we know that we're more likely perhaps to have some symptoms occur in the area, then it just becomes, or gives us an opportunity to prepare for that in more ways than one. One of the most important things that we seem to be finding with regards to pain and rehab is that how we view a situation that involves an injury or involves some pain is very predictive of how the overall situation is going to unfold. So if we end up being really worried about getting hurt, if we're worried that it's going to be as bad as a previous instance, if we have kind of a negative affect towards or in those situations, we're more likely to have more pain and to take probably longer to recover versus someone who doesn't rejoice at the thought of potentially being in pain, but perhaps thinks of pain as a thing that might happen. It's an experience. It's something that we all go through in some way, shape, or form. And even if pain comes around, it interferes with training or ability to conduct our daily tasks to the same degree and with the same ease that we normally do. If that person just resolves to make the most of that situation should it come up and recognizes that it's not a foregone conclusion. We're always talking about risk. We suck at predicting things. So we're talking about chances here. If that card comes up and they find themselves in pain, and that person just resolves to make the most of the situation. And if there are systems in place, decisions that the person knows they can make, or some guidelines for making those decisions. So with regards to training, if the back hurts, here are the decisions we can make. We can reduce the weight. We can cut some sets or cut some reps out of it. We can change the range of motion, use a bench or a box to sit to for squats, for instance. We can elevate the bar for deadlifts. We can change the tempo. We can make things go slower. And then by doing that, we probably need to use less weight. We can change the exercise. Instead of a back squat, we can try doing a front squat or a goblet squat. Or we can just do another leg exercise that doesn't hurt. If we can know of all of these potential options, then we can turn a potentially negative situation where we've got pain going on into a win, where we figure out how we can still keep ourselves training, or we can figure out how we can still do the things we need to do over the course of the day and be confident that we can work things. We can work things. Oh man, I really can't speak tonight. We can work things out. We can figure out a way to do the most important things that need doing. And two, we can also be confident that it's going to go away. Because the research is also pretty clear about that too, where acute bouts of low back pain are probably going to be going away sooner than later. And then for you, we've been through this a couple of times. The first time that you went through it, it was worse and it lasted longer. This time it wasn't as bad and it didn't last as long. we can take that as a positive indication that this might be a trend. We could theorize that maybe any potential episodes of low back pain are not going to be as bad and maybe not last as long, potentially in part to the overall resilience that you're building through your training and also just the experience of having been through this before. Maybe we're not as afraid of it. Maybe we have more know-how in terms of navigating these situations. Anyway, I recognize that I'm not fantastic at speaking and I very much went off on a tangent there. Hopefully some of that made sense. Please tell me if it didn't, and please tell me if you disagree with any of this, because I really want to have this conversation continue because I think it's an important one. It would be an important one for any athlete, but I think for you and for me especially, just having been through this a couple of times, I think it just becomes that much more important to know where we stand, how we're going to view any potential pain that comes up in the future, and then how we can manage things, how we can manage your training here and now to minimize the risk of having this happen. So one of the things that I want to do is use box squats. It's in quotation marks because I don't need you to actually use a box. We can use a bench, for instance. The reason why I want to use an exercise like a box squat is because I think that, again, with me pushing you to squat as deep as you have, or as deep as I have, with me pushing you to squat deep, that's just asking a lot from your hips and from your low back and your lumbopelvic area. So if we use something like a bench, that gives us consistent depth every time. We can also manage how high or how low the bench is. If it's too low for it to be comfortable, we can put something on top of the bench, like one of your blocks, and then make it so it's comfortable height. If it gets too easy, we can lower the surface to which you're sitting. I think that, having an object underneath you might also act as a little bit of a fail-safe, where maybe it helps to boost some of the confidence that you have as you're squatting. I think if we roll with something like a box squat, using your bench as the thing that we're sitting to, we could roll with this for probably a few months, probably get up to some decent weight, decent volume, in a way that hopefully feels good for your back. So that's something that we can try once you're back from your week in Toronto. That's the main thing that I want to do. And also, second thing that your trip actually helps with is I wanted to pull back on the intensity and the volume for your squats and for training in general, your lower body training, this week. Now, being away on a trip in a different gym that doesn't have powerlifting equipment is helpful because inherently it means that we're not going to be able to do all the same exercises. We're not going to be able to do as much weight or use as much weight. So that kind of takes care of it for us. So I put together a program in the Google Sheet that makes use of the bench and dumbbells and the cable machine. Those are the three main things that I could see, not including cardio equipment. The three main things I could see in the picture on the website. But there might be other things in the gym. I don't know for sure, but I wanted to structure things around the equipment that I know will be in there. So feel free to mix and match, call some audibles, switch some exercises in or out as you wish, and do as many sessions as you can. But obviously, it has to mesh with your schedule throughout the week, with all the business goings on. In terms of the training this past week, excuse me. Oh gosh, I'm just getting tired. Sorry about that. You were looking in fine form, especially for someone who just had a back tweak. I'm really happy with this. Your bench is continuing to improve. With your deadlift, one thing that I think I'd like to try potentially is seeing if we can get your feet even further apart. I'm wondering if you don't have a hip structure that we've talked about this before. It's the whole reason that I wanted you to do sumo is I think your hip structure might be such that having your feet wide allows you to sink deeper without having to round your back a whole bunch. I'm wondering if we can get your feet even further. I don't know if you bend that way. I don't know if you're that flexible. But again, that's something that we can play around with after this week is done. So shoot me an email if anything comes up or if you have any questions while you're away training. But yeah, man, again, I think that you've navigated this back tweak really well. I think that there are things that we can do to minimize the risk of it happening in the future. And I think one of the even I think one of the biggest things that we need to do is just make sure that we're not afraid of the back pain, which is easy to say, especially if someone's not living it. Um, but again, the research is really clear. If we can avoid being afraid of it, and we don't have to like it, we don't have to really want it, but we need to have contingencies in place. We need to not be fearful of it, so that if it does come up again, we A, have things that we can do, and B, we've already stacked things in such a way that it's likely to not be as bad or not last as long. And then plus, by just training, your body's resilience is going to be increasing. It's already increased from what it was last November, and it'll continue to do that. So again, sorry for the long rant. Hopefully some of it made sense. And please do tell me if it didn't. Hope that your week in Toronto goes really well, man. And I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.